chở cho lực hành nó quên cái này nó mua rồi. Cái này mỗi một nhà trồng được khoảng 20 tấn này bốc một tuyến đang ở vừa mới bốc được một nửa đi ra bốc.
A truck was carrying a heavy load and traveling down the road when it suddenly experienced a serious problem with its drivetrain. Without any warning, a gear inside the differential broke, interrupting the entire power transmission system to the rear wheels. The truck immediately became unable to move and was forced to stop on the road. This is a very serious type of failure for a truck, especially when the vehicle is carrying a large amount of cargo. Without timely repairs, the truck would not only be unable to continue its journey, but the damage could also spread to other important components inside the drivetrain. In this situation, the owner had no choice but to contact a mobile repair team. Shortly afterward, the young woman featured in the video quickly arrived at the scene to inspect the problem and carry out the necessary repairs. As soon as she reached the truck, she began inspecting the entire differential area to determine exactly why the vehicle could no longer move. This was far from a simple job, because the differential is located underneath the vehicle and contains many large and heavy mechanical components. To better understand this failure, we can think of the differential as an intermediate component responsible for receiving power from the drivetrain and distributing that power to the rear wheels. Inside the differential are shafts and a series of gears that transfer motion. When the engine produces power, that power travels through the drivetrain to the differential and then through the gears and shafts to turn the wheels. Because they have to transmit a tremendous amount of force, the gears inside the differential are constantly subjected to heavy loads. This is especially true for trucks that regularly carry heavy cargo. The stress placed on the drivetrain becomes even greater when the truck accelerates, climbs hills, or travels over rough roads. If the internal components have become worn, lack proper lubrication, or are continuously operated under loads beyond their capacity, the gears can become damaged and eventually lose or break their teeth. When an important gear breaks, the gears can no longer mesh correctly. As a result, power transmission is interrupted and the rear wheels can no longer receive power from the engine. After the initial inspection, the young woman began removing the components one by one so she could reach deeper inside the differential. This job required considerable strength and careful handling because the metal components were large and quite heavy. The bolts and connecting parts were gradually removed. She carefully inspected every area to avoid damaging components that were still in usable condition. Once the differential housing was opened, the cause of the failure was finally revealed. One of the internal gears had broken, and its damaged teeth had made it impossible for the system to continue transmitting power. This was the exact reason why the truck could not move, even though its engine was still capable of running. To fix the problem, the damaged gear had to be removed and replaced with a suitable new component. Before installing the replacement gear, she also had to inspect the surrounding components to make sure they had not been deformed or damaged when the original gear failed. Simply replacing the broken gear without checking the other affected components could allow the same problem to return after a short period of time. After cleaning the internal components, she inspected the condition of the shafts, the related gears, and the lubrication system. This was a very important step because lubricating oil helps reduce friction and heat while the gears are operating. For a system that has to withstand such heavy loads, using the correct oil and maintaining the proper oil level are extremely important for the service life of the internal components. Next, the replacement gear was carefully positioned and installed. She checked the engagement between the gears before closing the differential housing. Every component was tightened securely to ensure that the system could operate safely and reliably. After completing the assembly, she did not immediately send the truck back onto the road. The entire drivetrain had to be checked once again to make sure the gear was operating correctly and that there were no unusual noises. Finally, the most important moment arrived. The engine was started, and she began testing the truck's ability to transmit power. The rear wheels slowly began to move, showing that power from the engine was once again being transmitted through the differential and reaching the wheels normally. A failure that initially seemed likely to leave the truck stranded on the road had finally been repaired right at the scene. This case shows just how much stress the drivetrain of a heavily loaded truck has to withstand. Regular inspections, changing the oil at the proper intervals, and avoiding excessive loads can help reduce the risk of damage to critical components inside the differential. Most importantly, when a truck suffers a serious breakdown in the middle of a journey, having a mobile repair team arrive at the scene can save a great deal of time and the cost of transporting the vehicle back to a workshop. After a careful process of inspection, disassembly, replacement, and reassembly, the truck was finally ready to continue its journey. Let's watch the entire repair process and see exactly how this young woman managed to fix the broken differential gear. Before replacing the truck's differential with a new one, there is a task that may seem simple, but is extremely important: thoroughly cleaning the differential housing. This is a step that cannot be skipped because a large amount of old oil and grease has accumulated inside and around this area after a long period of operation. As you can see, the oil covering the differential housing has turned black, thick, and extremely dirty. It is not only stuck to the outside surface. The old oil has also seeped into many areas around the joints and other components of the system. Judging from its condition, it appears that the truck has not been properly serviced or had its oil changed for quite some time. This could also be one of the factors that contributed to the severe wear of the gears inside the differential. Lubricating oil is responsible for reducing friction, limiting the heat generated as the gears mesh, and protecting the metal surfaces. When the oil becomes too old, contaminated, or can no longer provide adequate lubrication, the gears have to operate under much harsher conditions. This is especially important for a truck that regularly carries heavy loads, because the stress placed on the drivetrain is already extremely high. If maintenance is not performed at the proper intervals, wear can become increasingly severe and eventually lead to gear damage, like the failure this truck has experienced. To prepare for the installation of the new differential, the young woman begins cleaning the entire differential housing. She uses pieces of cloth to wipe away the thick layer of dirty oil covering the surface. However, because the oil has been there for a long time and has become so thick, wiping it just once is nowhere near enough to get it clean. She has to wipe the surface repeatedly, change the cloth, and continue cleaning every area until the differential housing gradually becomes much cleaner. It is not an especially complicated task, but it requires patience and attention to detail. After most of the dirty oil has been removed, the surface of the differential housing is much cleaner, creating better conditions for installing the new differential. And now that the differential housing has been carefully cleaned, she is ready to move on to the next step: installing the new differential on the truck. After the differential housing has been thoroughly cleaned, we finally move on to one of the most important stages of the repair. I can see that she has brought out a brand new shaft and gear assembly to replace the damaged components. However, having a new differential assembly does not mean the job is finished. Before the differential can be installed back onto the truck, she has to carefully assemble all of the internal components with precision. This stage requires a great deal of care because even a small mistake during assembly could directly affect the operation of the entire drivetrain. The gears, bearings, shafts, and connecting components all have to be installed in their correct positions. Every part must mesh and work together precisely to form a complete drivetrain assembly. First, she checks the position of the shaft and gears. These are some of the most important components inside the differential, because they are directly responsible for transferring power from the drivetrain to the rear wheels. The gears cannot simply be installed wherever they fit. They must be positioned correctly and have the proper gear mesh. If the clearance between the gears is too small, friction can increase, causing them to heat up and wear out more quickly. On the other hand, if the clearance is too large, the gears may not mesh correctly, resulting in noise, vibration, and even damage when the truck is carrying a heavy load. Next come the bearings. Although they are relatively small compared with the entire differential assembly, they are extremely important components. The bearings allow the shaft to rotate smoothly, reduce friction, and keep the moving components in their correct positions. If even one bearing is installed incorrectly or not fitted according to the proper specifications, the entire drivetrain assembly may not operate correctly. That is why she has to carefully inspect everything before securing each component. Once the main components are in their correct positions, the next step is to install the connecting hardware and secure the entire assembly. Those small bolts may look insignificant, but they play a very important role. They must be tightened to the proper torque so that all the components remain securely in place while the truck is operating. However, tighter does not always mean better. Each position has its own technical requirements, and the tightening torque must remain within the specified range. If a bolt is too loose, the components may vibrate or shift while the vehicle is moving. If it is tightened too much, the threads or related components could be damaged. That is why assembling a differential is not simply a matter of putting the parts together. A mechanic needs to understand the structure of the system, know exactly where each component belongs, and carefully control the technical specifications throughout the assembly process. One of the most important factors is the clearance and tolerance between the components. These measurements must remain within the limits specified by the manufacturer. They determine the stability, durability, and service life of the entire differential assembly. Watching the way she checks and installs every individual component really shows us how much precision mechanical repair requires. From the outside, a differential assembly may look like nothing more than a simple metal housing, but inside it is an incredibly sophisticated mechanical system that has been carefully engineered. We really have to say that the engineers who designed this differential system were remarkably talented. This invention has become an extremely important part of the development of the automotive industry. From passenger cars to trucks and many other types of vehicles, drivetrain systems and gear mechanisms play a crucial role in converting engine power into the movement of the wheels. What is particularly impressive is that even though automotive technology has advanced tremendously, the basic principle of transferring power through gears and mechanical shafts still plays an important role. Modern engineers can improve the materials, design, lubrication, manufacturing precision, and efficiency, but the fundamental principle of the system remains highly effective. It may be very difficult to find a completely different solution that can replace this entire type of drivetrain mechanism in its current applications. Instead, the technology continues to evolve, making these systems lighter, stronger, quieter, and more efficient. Returning to the truck in this video, after every gear, bearing, shaft, and connecting component has been installed in the correct position, she continues by inspecting the entire differential assembly one more time. There must not be any missing components, incorrectly installed parts, or components that have not been securely fastened. Everything has to be in the correct position before the differential assembly can be installed back onto the truck. This is one of the most important stages that will determine whether the truck can operate safely after the repair. And now that the entire new differential assembly has been completely assembled, we are getting closer to the most important moment: installing it back onto the truck and testing whether the drivetrain can operate normally again. Let's continue watching to see whether after this entire repair process, the truck will be able to run powerfully once again and get back to work. And finally, we have reached the last stages of repairing this truck. After the entire new differential assembly has been fully assembled, carefully inspected, and all the gears, bearings, and internal components have been confirmed to be in their correct positions, she can now install the entire differential back into its original position on the truck. This is probably one of the most difficult stages of the entire repair process. The differential assembly she is about to install is certainly not a lightweight component. Judging from its size and construction, I would guess that it could weigh several dozen kilograms. With such a heavy and bulky component, it would certainly not be easy for one person to lift it, keep it balanced, and position it precisely underneath the truck. On top of that, this job requires a very high level of accuracy. If the differential is even slightly out of position, or cannot be held securely during installation, securing the mounting points would become extremely difficult. Therefore, I think she may have received some assistance from another person during this stage. Perhaps the helper assisted in lifting or holding the differential while she focused on aligning it and installing the components. However, this assistance may not have been shown in the video. Perhaps that footage was cut out so the video could focus on the main work that she performed herself. So, we should not pay too much attention to whether or not she received assistance. What is more important is that when we look at the entire process, we can see that she still handled most of the technical work herself. From diagnosing the problem, removing the old components, cleaning the differential housing, assembling the gears and bearings, to checking each individual component again, she was directly involved in the work. Once the differential assembly was positioned correctly, she began securing it to the truck's frame. The large bolts were gradually installed into their mounting positions. This was another stage where extreme care was essential. Every bolt had to be positioned correctly and tightened securely to make sure the differential would not vibrate or shift while the truck was operating. Since this component is directly responsible for transferring power to the rear wheels, any mistake during installation could affect the truck's operation and safety. One by one, the final bolts were tightened. After so many stages of disassembly, inspection, cleaning, replacement, assembly, and adjustment, the new differential assembly was finally secured completely in its position. Looking back at the entire process, it is clear that this was by no means a simple job. A small failure inside the drivetrain had left the entire truck unable to move, and bringing it back into working condition required the mechanic to complete many different stages of repair. What impressed me the most was her patience and ability to handle the job. Even though the work involved many heavy components and required a high level of precision, she carried out each step quite carefully. She may have received assistance with some of the heavier stages, but that is completely understandable. In mechanical repair, especially when dealing with heavy components, having another person to help not only makes the work easier, but can also improve the safety of the mechanic herself. What matters is that she directly performed and controlled the main technical work, and at this point, she can confidently say that she has done an excellent job. After the final bolt was tightened, the repair of the truck officially came to an end. From a truck sitting helplessly on the roadside because of a broken gear inside the differential, the drivetrain has finally been restored after an extensive repair process. This is certainly an impressive result for the mechanic who carried out the work. And now, before we end today's video, I would really like to hear what you think. What do you think about the entire repair process of this truck? Were you impressed by the girl's skills? In your opinion, could the broken gear have been caused by the truck regularly carrying heavy loads? Or do you think there may have been another cause? If you have any comments or thoughts about today's video, please share them with us in the comment section below. Every one of your opinions is interesting and also gives us more motivation to continue making videos about vehicle repair and restoration in the future. And if you found this repair process interesting, don't forget to follow our upcoming videos so you can join us in exploring more fascinating repair projects. Once again, thank you so much for taking the time to watch our video. We wish you happiness, good health, and many wonderful things in life. Goodbye, and see you again in our next videos.